There is a new outbreak and everyone is losing their minds. You are an infectious disease expert, top of your field, creme de la creme. You have the authority to be the hero that everyone needs. You consult your inner circle of experts and craft your message. Everyone must be afraid, very afraid, and they must listen to only your message. After all, it is a pandemic, and in times like this, you as a scientist are the voice of God. Right in the nick of time, a partner comes along with a heart of gold and a record as clean as a whistle. With this new alliance, you set out to create the perfect solution to stop the spread of the disease. And while naysayers grumble on about rigorous approval processes and cost-benefit analysis, this is no time for hesitation. To hell with the naysayers. They think that science is a process, and for the process to be valid, it must be transparent and robust to critique. They are wrong. You have the science himself on your side.
I'd have to laugh at that. But if they get up and really aim their bullets at Tony Fauci, they're really criticizing science, because I represent science.
You have the solution and you travel fast.
We had to really move at the speed of science.
You warp space and time to solve problems in a way no one else can. Nothing will stand in the way of your immaculate design, not even serious adverse effects. This is how you disappear adverse effects in 5 steps or less. This is a new disease and no one really knows how it spreads or who is really at high risk, but not you. You understand infectious disease in a way no one else does. Even when it quickly becomes clear that most people survive this disease and some people are at much higher risk than others, and that most fatalities are older than 70 years with at least 2 comorbidities, you insist that everyone should be afraid. This is no time to recommend that people get their comorbidities and risk factors under control, or to minimize disruptions to those at lowest risk while protecting those at highest risk.
As I understand focused protection, let the virus spread among the population. Don't disrupt the economy, don't disrupt anything. Let it spread among the less vulnerable and try to protect the more vulnerable. That's what I understand focused protection to be.
I'd amend that with one thing. It's not a question of let. Open schools is a good example. Are we letting the virus spread when we open schools? No, we're letting school happen. The virus may or may not spread.
I'd have to laugh at that.
This is no time for personal considerations. This is no time for personalized medicine. While you and your trusted partners are working tirelessly to solve this problem, everyone is at extremely high risk. Through sheer genius and willpower, you finally create a marvel of the modern age. Shots like yours are the greatest innovation of modern medicine, and to you, they are all created equal and cannot be considered case by case. They are all safe and effective. They stop pandemics by stopping the spread of disease. People that get them rarely, if ever, get sick, and more importantly, don't transmit the disease forward. So, communities that get them en masse will eradicate diseases. This is what happened with smallpox. This is what happens with polio and measles worldwide. This is what happens with your...
Wait a minute!
How many vaccinations do we need to get fully in the arms to be at what the theoretical herd immunity would be in cases crash? Anybody?
Yeah, I think that's going to be a difficult number to give, because herd immunity as a concept means you get enough people vaccinated, enough people infected, so that you have a core of protected people that's a blanket of protection over even the vulnerables who cannot. The threshold of herd immunity is a number we don't know yet for this particular virus. We know it for measles, but we don't know yet what that is. We can guess it's somewhere between 70.
That uncertainty is probably the thing that is going to be the hardest thing to grapple with.
Let's talk about some of the solutions in terms of coronavirus. You acknowledged to the New York Times that you've moved the goalposts in terms of what it would take to reach so-called herd immunity in the United States. Here's what you said. You said, when polls said about when polls said only about half of all Americans would take a vaccine, I was saying herd immunity would take 70 to 75%. Then when newer surveys said 60% or more would take it, I thought I can nudge this up a bit. So I went to 80, 85. And then you go on to say that it may be as high as 90%. So my question is, why weren't you straight with the American people about this to begin with?
No, actually, Dana, I don't think it could be interpreted as being straight or not. We have to realize that we have to be humble and realize what we don't know. These are pure estimates, and the calculations that I made, 70, 75%, it's a range. The range is going to be somewhere between 70 and 85%. The reason I first started saying 70, 75, 85, that's not a big leap to go from 75 to 85. It was really based on calculations and pure extrapolations from measles. Measles is about 98% effective vaccine. The COVID-19 vaccine is about 94, 95%. When you get below 90% of the population vaccinated with measles, you start seeing a breakthrough against the herd immunity. People starting to get infected like we saw in the upper New York State and in New York City with the Orthodox Jewish group when we had measles outbreak. So I made a calculation that COVID-19, SARS-CoV-2, is not as nearly as transmissible as measles. Measles is the most transmissible infection you can imagine. So I would imagine that you would need something a little bit less than the 90%. That's where I got to the 85. But I think we all have to be honest and humble. Nobody really knows for sure. But I think 70 to 85% for herd immunity for COVID-19 is a reasonable estimate. And in fact, most of my epidemiology colleagues agree with me.
Yeah, of course. Nothing is exact. I guess my question was about polling. It seemed in that quote to suggest that you were basing your recommendation on polling and what people could accept. Is that not what you meant?
No, I mean, it's a bit of that. I want to encourage the people of the United States and globally to get vaccinated, because as many as we possibly get vaccinated will get closer to herd immunity. So the bottom line is it's a guesstimate. I gave a range, and I use any discussion like we're having now, Dana, to encourage people to get to that goal of 70 to 85% of the people vaccinated. That's where we really want to be.
Okay, and just to put a button on it, no sugarcoating, you're saying 75 to 80% is the goal, in your view, as of now, based on what you know when it comes to herd immunity, not 90%.
Right.
Okay.
What's going to save you right now is Paxlovid. But once we get through this wave, during that lull, you should get vaccinated and boosted, because we do believe it will protect you, particularly if you're over 70. I knew these vaccines were not going to protect against infection, and I think we overplayed the vaccines, and it made people then worry that it's not going to protect against severe disease and hospitalization. It will, but let's be very clear. 50% of the people who died from the Omicron surge were older, vaccinated. So that's why I'm saying, even if you're vaccinated and boosted, if you're unvaccinated right now, the key is testing and Paxlovid.
Was the Pfizer COVID vaccine tested on stopping the transmission of the virus before it entered the market? If not, please say it clearly. If yes, are you willing to share the data with this committee? And I really want a straight answer, yes or no, and I'm looking forward to it. Thank you very much.
Regarding the question around, did we know about stopping immunisation before it's entered the market? No. We had to really move at the speed of science to really understand what is taking place in the market. And from that point of view, we had to do everything at risk.
Your solution is so effective that everyone must get it. There is no doubt in your mind that a 70-year-old man is at the same risk from the disease as a 10-year-old girl. You have the silver bullet, and you will deliver it with surgical imprecision. A signal of concern comes out of international research and your own reporting systems, but we all know that researchers in other parts of the world don't measure up to you. Unlike them, you don't even need to do robust studies to know the truth that adverse effects are extremely rare. There's obviously no chance that they may be rare to you precisely because you don't study them with the same rigor. And those reporting systems, well, anyone can lie on a VS report, even if it's a crime to do so. Then those FOIA requests and court orders and international scientists just won't shut up about adverse effects. They dare to analyze your partner's trial data and find a 1 in 800 risk for serious adverse effects. That's less rare than similar shots that were withdrawn before, but no, nothing to see here. You are the authority, you have all the evidence, and since the politicians and courts won't scrutinize you, only one question truly remains. What adverse effect signal? Finally, the solid science proves you right. You point to many studies showing that the risks of adverse effects are extremely low and the disease is far worse than your solution. In most of these genius studies, all doses, dosing intervals, and recipients are thrown into the same analysis. Everyone knows that 70-year-old women are at the same risk for adverse effects as 20-year-old men.
When you look at vaccine-induced myocarditis, you could just look at the whole population, everyone who got vaccines, but you'd be lumping together 20-year-old college men with 87-year-old women. You'd lump them all together and you'll get a rate of vaccine-induced myocarditis. And if you see that rate, you might say, well, you know what? The virus is way worse than that. So no matter what, we must press on with our vaccination campaign. But that would be a very silly way to do it because a 20-year-old man and an 87-year-old woman are very different. They may have different rates of benefit of COVID-19 vaccination. Of course, it's going to be a lot higher in the older person, and different rates of myocarditis. And in fact, what we know is that myocarditis disproportionately affects men in a certain peak demographic. The absolute peak is like 16 to 22. 12 to 16, it's on the way up. And then 22 to 40, it's still higher. I mean, 22 to 28 is higher than 28 to 40. But that's the peak demographic. And what you want to do in your analysis is be able to precisely say the risk and benefit to somebody based on their age and their sex. Now, you see that the highest incidence of myocarditis occurs in studies that break it out by more stratifiers. In other words, when you actually tell me about 16-year-old men separate from 87-year-old women, it looks a lot worse. Vaccine-induced myocarditis in 16-year-old men, particularly mRNA vaccination, particularly dose 2, and particularly Moderna. And this is a way people have been hiding and obscuring a very necessary dialogue, which is that our vaccine policies don't have to be the same for 16-year-old man and 87-year-old women. Many analyses lump everyone together to hide illegitimate safety signals. So I show you right here on the screen, when we look systematically at all this, we find that just about a quarter of people are breaking it out by age, sex, manufacturer, and dose. And that's too low. I mean, this is just elementary stratifying variables. I mean, it should be 100%. Why is it only 28%? We find 45% of analyses are lumping lots of people together, and that's no good at all. Eric Topol is a cardiologist. He cites an Annals of Internal Medicine paper, and look what he's citing. The overall incidence of mRNA vaccine-induced myocarditis after the first dose was 1 in 200,000 and 1 in 30,000 after the second dose in ages 5 to 39. But 5 to 39, that's a ridiculous way to lump people. You can't tell the difference between a 6-year-old boy and a 26-year-old college student? We know mRNA-induced myocarditis is not a prepubescent phenomenon. Like myocarditis, it generally occurs post-pubescence. We know the highest risk group is 16 to 22. 18 to 22 is the peak incidence. Why are you adding in a 7-year-old? And why are you adding in a 39-year-old? And as someone on the upper end of that spectrum, I can say, I know the difference between being 39 and being 20. And there's a big difference, okay? So this is a misleading statistic. And then he writes, the benefits of mRNA vaccination greatly outweigh the risk. That's not the question. The question is, could you have vaccinated some subgroups more carefully, more prudently, and with a better acknowledgement of the risk-benefit profile? Some of the numbers on the right, they actually do two disservices. One, they underestimate the risk of myocarditis in young men, which is terrible, leads to bad policy. It also overestimates the risk in an 80-year-old woman because they're getting lumped in with young men. So it fails both groups of people, ironically.
I'd have to laugh at that.
These scientists don't know the truth as you do. Lumping people of all kinds in your recommendations is simply great science. A lump a day keeps a nuance away. Now that you've slapped all obstacles aside, it's finally time to implement your blanket policy. You're in a position of power and authority tramples over everything. You can twist arms and twist you do. Remember those naysayers? Well, they won't be employed or able to express themselves on social media much longer. And at last, in this perfect silence, lies perfect consensus. All must give in to your solution or lose access to travel, employment, and social integration. You have crafted the perfect policy. One policy to rule them all.